Good evening. A decision is expected within days over plans to build a new nuclear power station in Somerset. Work is already underway at Hinkley Point, but the site's owners, EDF, are also locked in talks with the government over getting a high enough guaranteed price. Today on the Sunday Politics, the government minister, Steve Webb, claimed this wouldn't be a subsidy.
Anyone who's going to make a long-term energy investment needs to know they've got a long-term return, and that's true of renewables as well. If people are going to put in the infrastructure, put cabling under the sea and all that's needed, they do need long-term certainty. So long-termism is right.
If EDF can't strike a deal, they've warned the whole project could be stopped. Plans for nuclear power are in the balance. They're clearing the site ready for construction in Somerset, but the company wants the government to guarantee a minimum price that consumers will have to pay for the electricity. Could it be one utility bill that we will refuse to pay? Well, powering our debate today are two local MPs who share the coalition benches. They are the Conservative from Weston-super-Mare, that's John Penrose, and the Lib Dem from Thornbury and Yate, Steve Webb. Now, Britain's entire energy policy has reached a critical point. Within days, we'll know if plans for a new generation nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point in Somerset have been approved. But an even bigger and more contentious decision is also due shortly about the price we'll pay for our electricity for decades to come. Here's Paul Baltrop.
On the Somerset coast, the ground lies ready. Close by the old plant that's been generating electricity since the 1970s, they want to put a new plant to supply power to the 2070s and beyond. Hinkley-C was meant to be the first of a new nuclear generation, but other planned plants have been slowed or shelved in a big battle over money.
Behind the scenes, there's some very tough talking going on between the government and EDF. The nuclear industry insists they need a good guaranteed price for their electricity for decades to come. But the levels they seek are far higher than what we presently pay for power generated by more polluting forms of energy, like gas. And if a deal is done, ministers then face another big challenge, explaining to voters that this isn't a government subsidy for nuclear power, because the extra costs will in fact go on their electricity bills. The nuclear industry stress that theirs is a huge investment and point out that consumers already pay more for power that's clean and green.
There will be an assurance of a price for the electricity generated by these low-carbon sources. That's necessary in order to encourage the investment. The consumer will have to pay for that security. There may be a sort of a premium, but it is essential to provide that longer-term security into the future.
Being blunt, that we'll all have to pay more doesn't come easily to politicians. Energy and climate change is led by a Liberal Democrat, whose party is still officially anti-nuclear. Ed Davey is grappling with the daunting financial challenge.
Yes, we are putting investment into clean energy. That will cost some money. At the moment, it's about 2% of people's bills. By 2020, it'll be about 7%. So I'm not going to hide that from you. But on the other side of the equation, we're going to help people save energy and save money.
At Greenpeace, they know about paying more to be green. Solar panels part power their headquarters, but they warn that nuclear carries extra hidden costs.
If we're to believe the leaks that are coming out in the papers, then the price that's going to be offered to nuclear is something like twice the current electricity price. So unless the price suddenly escalates hugely over the next few years, we are going to be finding we're paying more to nuclear power than we would be under a pure market framework. What we've been concerned about is that enormous amounts of subsidy are potentially hidden in secret clauses in those contracts, which we won't know about until they have to be enacted when costs have overrun, when waste needs to be handled differently, and so on and so forth.
The stakes are high. Hundreds of millions of pounds have been spent by EDF preparing for a nuclear renaissance. But if the price isn't right, the churned fields at Hinkley Point could become a white elephant for Britain's uncertain energy policy.
Paul Baltrop. Well, this is a subject that splits many of the coalition partners. Steve Webb, you're in the government and therefore for nuclear power, but you're a Lib Dem and therefore against nuclear power. So how does that work?
I'm not a great fan, I never have been, and I have a nuclear power plant that's recently closed at Albury, my constituency, and plans for a new one there. And funnily enough, one of the things that unites people who are pro and anti-nuclear in our area is that it's going to be, I think Prince Charles would call it a monstrous carbuncle. It's going to have cooling towers in the Severn Estuary. I think there's a lot of local opposition to that particular site, even amongst people who've worked in the industry and support the principle of new nuclear.
Down in Somerset, EDF, as I understand it, is saying, look, we'll spend £5 billion, we'll build a nuclear power station, but in return for that, we need the price of electricity guaranteed for years and years and years to come, and a promise that you'll buy it from us. Is that a good deal for the taxpayer?
It depends on the price is the simple answer, I think. I mean, the thing which unites the coalition is that we don't want to see subsidies being paid to nuclear. If we pay a fair price, a market price, albeit over a long term, then I think that it will end up being a sensible deal for the taxpayer. If, on the other hand, the negotiations don't go well and they aren't handled properly and we end up paying too much, we're locked into something for a very long time, that could be very, very expensive indeed.
The Energy and Climate Change Committee made the suggestion that rather than leave it to a private company to build it and to generate electricity, after all, they need to keep their shareholders happy. Why doesn't the state just do it? Why don't we just build nuclear power stations like we used to and run them?
Well, because it's an incredibly technical thing, and almost certainly the private sector has got more of the skills and more of the expertise than is required. Almost certainly, if you put politicians in charge of it, we'll bog it up somewhere.
But they've got to make a profit. And they're not taking any risk. If the taxpayer guarantees that we'll buy the electricity that comes out of nuclear point, then what risk is the private company taking?
Hang on, running a power plant is a very difficult, very risky thing to do. If you know you've got a guaranteed price.
We did the first in the world.
Yeah, but if we put the price at the right level, then it will be something where they aren't automatically guaranteed to make money. They've got to make sure that they are doing it efficiently. If they do it inefficiently, they'll lose money.
But if we guarantee as taxpayers that we'll pay a certain price for it, which is perhaps double what the market rate is at the moment, then isn't it a subsidy anyway, which the Lib Dems were against?
A big hike above the market price is a subsidy. That's absolutely right. There's a difference between guaranteeing a price for the long term, and anyone who's going to make a long-term energy investment needs to know they've got a long-term return. And that's true of renewables as well. If people are going to put in the infrastructure, put cabling under the sea and all that's needed, they do need long-term certainty. So long-termism is right, but a sort of quiet bung through a big hike in the price isn't right.
But that is a subsidy, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's right. And that's what I'm saying. So I have no problem with a long-term price guarantee at a fair level, but just a quiet bung on the price is not something I support.
So how much should us payers, the utility bill payers, be prepared to fork out for nuclear power?
That's prejudging the results of the negotiation. I think the important thing is it's clearly a very expensive thing to build in the first place. But as Steve was saying, if you look at what we're being charged and what we're guaranteeing prices on for onshore wind farms, for offshore wind farms, and potentially for tidal power as well, nuclear needs to take its place in that. If it's way more expensive than those, then we're probably getting ripped off. If it's competitive with them, then actually could be a good deal.
You know what's happened in other places, including in your constituency. The power companies say, look, we're not mucking around anymore. You're not giving us a guaranteed price. We're walking away. If EDF do that, where does that leave us?
Well, what we should be doing on energy policy is not focusing so much on stuff that will take 10 to 15 years to come, and that's what they're talking about for Albury. There is stuff we can do today that is boring, prosaic, and far more sensible, which is not wasting the stuff.
Like what?
Well, for example, energy efficiency. Let me give you a simple example, because you immediately is, oh, I'm not interested in that.
You can't just insulate your loft and say we don't need Hinkley Point.
Think about, yes, that's exactly what you can do. Think about all the energy that we waste. Simple example, we've switched from light bulbs to low energy light bulbs. I know they drive everybody mad, and they're improving, but think about how that all adds up to the equivalent of a big proportion of a power station. And that's the sort of thing that's so low, nobody's interested in it, doesn't grab the headlines, and you can do that today, and that all gets distracted from because there's all this glamorous heavy stuff going on.
Yeah, but the old power stations are closing down.
They are, which is why we have to do things. If you rely on nuclear, which won't be producing for 10 or 15 years, those ones will have been long closed by then.
You don't sound terribly keen on nuclear.
I'm not a great fan.
OK, thank you.